Andy Burnham played a role in the privatisation of an NHS hospital during his time as Labour's health secretary, despite heavy criticism towards Prime Minister Boris Johnson over his unfair handling of coronavirus. Mr. Johnson is reportedly set to ignore a ministerial rebellion by placing Greater Manchester into a Tier 3 lockdown today. The county's mayor, Mr. Burnham, has accused the government of trying to make his region a sacrificial lamb by imposing the strictest measures without enough financial support. Merseyside and Lancashire have already been placed under the highest level of measures, and the government is offering to pay 2/3 of wages for employees affected. Mr. Burnham has insisted Greater Manchester is not in any way complacent about the hospital situation, as the number of COVID-19 patients rose significantly in a week, adding it was about fairness to help low-paid and self-employed people. But it can be revealed that Mr. Burnham also championed a plan to privatise parts of the NHS during his time in the cabinet. Between 2004 and 2014, NHS output increased considerably and hospital admissions increased by 32%, outpatient attendances by 17%, primary care consultations by 25% and community care activity by 14%. It was during this period that Hinchinbrook Hospital was claimed to be offered to private profiteers on David Cameron's watch amid rising strains on hospitals, but that offering actually took place under the Brown government in 2009. The Treasury and the Department of Health approved the outline business case and procurement plan, which meant that private organizations would be invited to bid to run the hospital. Ahead of the 2015 general election, Mr. Burnham sought to reduce the vote to a binary choice between a part privatized, two-tier health market under David Cameron and a public, integrated national health and care service under Labour. It came as private firm Uniting Care won an £800 million deal to provide care for older and mentally ill people in Cambridgeshire after the coalition government's reorganisation of healthcare came into force. Mr. Burnham, at the time, warned not to tie the hands of the incoming Labour government by signing deals worth hundreds of billions of pounds before the election. But, in 2010, Circle Health was awarded a contract to run Hinchinbrook Hospital, the first time an NHS hospital had been wholly run by a private firm. The decision to contract out the NHS hospital's management was made by the then Health Secretary Mr. Burnham. Health service unions called on the government to suspend the process they believed would lead to the privatisation of an entire NHS trust and its £40 million debt. Under the plan set out by Mr. Burnham, internal NHS organisations would be the preferred provider of services within the NHS. But as Hinchinbrook was deemed to be a failing trust due to its massive accumulated debt, the Regional Health Authority was able to put the management contract out to private companies. Karen Jennings, head of health at Unison, said at the time, "The views of local people, who want to keep their hospital in the NHS, are being trampled on. This whole outsourcing process is an unnecessarily costly and dangerous experiment. Hinchinbrook Hospital does have debts, but they are no worse than many other trusts." Despite this, in 2015, Circle announced it was pulling out of its contract. It blamed a £5 million loss and an NHS crisis, including unprecedented increases in accident and emergency attendances, insufficient care plans for patients awaiting discharge, and funding levels that have not kept pace with demand. The Care Quality Commission, CQC, released a report into Circle's management of Hinchinbrook Hospital that may highlight the real reason. Hinchinbrook was given the CQC's worst ever rating for caring, and both safety and leadership were also at the bottom. But Mr. Burnham said he would fight any attempts to blame him for failings in the NHS before 2010. It came amid the release of a report that criticised excess death rates at 14 NHS trusts in England while he was Health Secretary by Sir Bruce Keogh. It was commissioned by Mr. Cameron after Robert Francis's damning inquiry into the unnecessary deaths of up to 1,200 patients in Stafford Hospital in 2010. In an interview on Sky in 2013, Mr. Burnham said, "To be honest, I'm fed up of these general accusations being hurled in my direction. I will account for all of the things that I did as Secretary of State. I took actions to reveal what happened at Stafford. I took actions at Basildon, at Thameside. I left warnings in place at 5 hospitals." However, on reflection of his role, he told the Eye in 2018, "It was a tumultuous time. That was when the government was starting to seriously lose its way. I arrived at the Department of Health on the 5th of June, 3 days after a World Health pandemic had been declared on swine flu. I walked straight into that. It dominated my first 3 months in office. We hadn't had a World Health pandemic in living memory, so I was walking into a department that is normally quite sure-footed, but was a bit wrong-footed, put it that way. Plans had been laid, but then the reality was hitting, and that was causing all kinds of challenges. Stafford Hospital was run by the Mid-Staffordshire NHS Foundation Trust, and the scandal came to national attention because of an investigation by the Healthcare Commission in 2008, which uncovered a litany of substandard care. However, both Mr. Brown and then Health Secretary Alan Johnson apologised to those who suffered at the hospital by the time Mr. Burnham was dealing with the fallout. Mr. Burnham said, "I had inherited a situation where there were growing calls for an inquiry. MPs wanted, rightly, an inquiry, but the Department of Health had resisted one, and it had done so on the grounds that if you subjected one hospital to a full public inquiry it wouldn't be able to function. Basically, I created an independent inquiry, and if he needs to compel witnesses because they weren't coming forward, come back to me and I would upgrade it." It's a little frustrating for me now when people rewrite that story, because I did that, and I did it with the full weight of the Department of Health opposing what I was trying to do.